People are certain that the election of 2024 will be the most exciting and enticing ones in American history, says the people who have no clue about the 1824 American presidential election. That's right. 200 years ago, in my opinion, the most crazy election happened in American history. Most historians would at least partly agree with me on this one, and I'm about to explain to you why I think the election of 1824 is the best to learn about for people who are just learning about history. Well, ever since the end of the War of 1812 and 1815, the era of good feelings had kicked in. Americans were feeling great about themselves and about their country. And actually, with this election, it stopped the era of good feelings, and you're going to understand why later. But now, James Monroe, who won the election of 1816 essentially unopposed, won the next election in 1820 unopposed, with Daniel D. Tompkins as his running mate. Daniel D. Tompkins would be the last vice president to be renominated on a ticket, and actually, in fact, the only vice president to be renominated on a ticket with the same president in the entirety of the 1800s, and be the first vice president to serve, or the last vice president to serve, two full terms until Woodrow Wilson 100 years later. But he actually died a couple of months after this election took place. He was feeling too sick to run, so he didn't run. Also, the Democratic Republicans were the only party in the entire country. Could you imagine that today, having one political party in the country? Yeah, things would be a little hectic, obviously. And there were four guys running. There was Henry Clay, who would eventually start the Whig Party. There was John Quincy Adams, the incumbent Secretary of State. There was Andrew Jackson, who was a War of 1812 hero, and he was in politics, but he wasn't, you know, known for his political stuff as much as he was known for his War of 1812 stuff. And then there was William H. Crawford, who wasn't really important. I'm just going to just say that. Many saw people as Henry Clay the best option to choose in this election, which is ironic when you realize the results of this election. William H. Crawford, no one was really too excited about. And actually, his supporters campaigned the least out of the other three. John Quincy Adams was seen as this elitist guy who would make life easier for the rich rather than the poor, who, by the way, keep this in mind when it comes to the election, just got the right to vote. Yes, back then only rich white men can vote in elections. Now, just white men can vote. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, which, it's still a small part of the population, but we're getting to more and more expansive people who can vote. But the poor really don't want to vote for Adams because, again, he's the elitist guy. They want to vote for Andrew Jackson, who was the common man, essentially. He was one of the first presidential candidates to have no degree of wealth whatsoever. He was rags to riches, essentially, and Jackson appeals to many of the common men voters who, again, just got the right to vote. All right, keep that in mind. And there's more poor men than there are rich men. And well, the results were as complicated as ever. Unlike us Canadian, British, Australian, or other members of the Commonwealth folk, you don't need a plurality of the votes, which means you can get less than half as long as you have more to win. You need to have a majority, meaning you have to have over 50% of the vote. And despite Andrew Jackson having 19 electoral votes, doesn't count for him because he didn't get a majority because John Quincy Adams had 84, William H. Crawford had 41, and Henry Clay had 37. Jackson also had more of the popular vote with 41.4% to Adams' 30.9%, to Henry Clay's 13%, and then Crawford with 11.2%. That didn't all matter because despite Henry Clay having the third most amount of votes, he didn't have enough electoral votes, so he didn't go on to the next stage. Well, what the next stage? I've never heard of this next stage. Well, the Constitution lays it out plainly. If no candidate gets a majority of the electoral votes, the states will have to decide who wins the election. Meaning, every state has to choose one candidate that they'd like as president of the United States between all of the members of the House in that state. So nowadays, New York gets, I think, 27 House members. All 27 of them would have to discuss, who do we like more as president? And whoever it is, they vote in for that guy. Each state gets one vote, meaning the guy with the most amount of states won in this kind of House thing becomes the president. And because Henry Clay was Speaker of the House, remember, he's gone. He cannot be in this other stage. Henry Clay was Speaker of the House, meaning he had enormous influence over the House, meaning he could choose whoever he wanted, or at least could advocate for whoever he wanted to become president, and they'd have a higher chance of winning. He hated Andrew Jackson, and he really didn't think Crawford would be a good president. Does that mean he'd think Adams would be a great president? Only if they did a corrupt bargain. Or at least that's what Jackson and his supporters called it. Henry Clay said, hey, I'll try and get as many people in the House to vote for you if you make me your Secretary of State. And remember, Adams was Secretary of State under James Monroe. James Monroe, the president, was Secretary of State under James Madison. James Madison, Secretary of State under Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State 2 presidents earlier under George Washington. So Secretary of State seemed to be the best way to become president. Henry Clay obviously wanted to become president, so he wanted to be the Secretary of State. John Quincy Adams said, sure. Sure enough, John Quincy Adams got 13 states carried out of the potential, was 13 plus 11, 24 states. Jackson got 7 and Crawford got 4, with John Quincy Adams winning the states despite having, the least amount of votes, at least compared to Jackson, and less electoral votes to Jackson. Now he becomes the president and served for 4 years, and then 1828 came along. The 1824 election was rooted in conspiracy and corruption. And it was the first time out of 5 in American history where the winner of the election lost the popular vote. What do you guys think? Do you think the election of 1824 was the most exciting and enticing for new learners of history to learn about? Certainly, it's one of the most complex, but interesting? For me, yes. What about for you guys, though? Please leave a comment down below.